Շատ հարցում եք ուշադրություն, բոլորը հիշում եք վիճային նորանոցի ձայները անջատել։ Բացի ժամանակ, որ մստիկան չի։ Ներկայացնում ենք արեք օրակարգը, պարոն ասում ամենի կողմից լինի դասախոսություն, որից հետո ավելի շատ ժամանակ եք հացիչու պատասխան։ Խնդրում ենք ձեր կուտաբերություններ, որսի հացը դասանությունով կարողանան այդ պատասը ավելի ստացիություններ և ավելի ասանալի ուտանոցել մեր ժամանակ։ Սրտական դասախոսություն, դրանից հետո հարց ու պատասխաններ և դրանից հետո ընդհանուր ծանոթություն իրացություն։ Խնդրում ենք հետևել հարկածներին և հնարավորինս ակտիվ լինելով փորձենք պատկասը։ Շատ արի, այժմ Սկսենք այսօրվա պատմվածքը, շարժական ինձ ժամանակի այստեղ եք, ուզում եմ առանձնահատուկ շնորհակալություն հայտնել Արուստի միջազգային հիմնադրամին, ովքեր որ աջակցեցին եւ համաձայնեցին իրականացնել այդ պատմվածքը եւ այս կարճ ժամանակահատվածում ձեր հայաստանացի ընթացքում համաձայնեցին երիտասարդների հետ եւ ձեր մտքերով եւ փորձով օգտակար Սակայն ներկայացնել պարոն Մասուդ Ահմեդին, Արուստի միջին այցել դեպարտամենտ Արուստի միջազգային հիմնադրամ, բարեկամության պարոն Մասուդ Երկրի բաժնի փոխ ղեկավար պարոն Ջուա Տակոյին, բարեկամություն Եվ Արուստի միջազգային հիմնադրամի Հայաստանի ներկայացուցիչ Տիկին Թերեզա Դաբան Սանչեզ։ Հույս ունենք, որ նորատիվ հանդիպումները շարունակական կլինեն։ Շարունակել եք եւ չեմ ցանկանում ձեր ժամանակը չարաշահել եւ խոսքը սիրով ցանկանում եմ տրամադրել պարոն Մասուդ Ահմեդին։
Thank you very much, Teresa, for having organized this session on our side. Thank also the leadership for having put up this opportunity. And most of all, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to come and spend an hour or so together, where I can share our perspectives and I hope also to benefit from your own ideas, your own questions, and your own thoughts. I'm happy to talk about question and answer. I'm happy to talk about any topic that you would like, about the IMF, about our media, that would add to your knowledge. But I thought it would be useful to get started is to say a few words about the international context in which Armenia is now trying to find a way forward to navigate the challenge of making sure that it can provide a better living standard future for the young people. Ultimately, unless you have hope and a project amongst the youth in any country, it's very hard to see a country prosper. And at the same time, to manage the shocks and the pressures that come from a difficult international environment. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let me just go back and say, I was last here in 2009, 6 years ago. And when I came then, Armenia was struggling with one very important international shock, which was the global financial and economic crisis. You remember there was a global crisis at that time. Many countries were affected, the United States, Europe initially, and then it spread to have an impact on many other countries. In that period, economic activity contracted by about 14%. That's a very big drop for having 1 year. Now, I come back 6 years later. Armenia is struggling with another region. This time, it was the impact of the slowdown and the contraction in Russia and the tensions in the. So, in this context, how can you try to achieve that objective of moving forward to improve lives and manage the constraints? And what is the role of leadership in that? You're all going to be, you are leaders already, that's why you're here. But you're going to take forward important positions of responsibility as time goes on. And what is the nature of that you need to manage your business, your public sector job, and your own lives in some way? in a new environment in which so much is changing in the world. That's what I want to talk a little bit about. So let's look first at the external environment in which Armenia is now placed and where you have to put your position. First, let's look at the economic environment. Well, as I said, what happens in Russia has a big impact on what happens in Armenia, the economic side. And this year, the Russian economy is expected to contract by 3.5%. Next year, virtually. And then more importantly, if you look out for the next 2 years, 3.5% growth every year in Russia. That's quite a bit lower than what Russia has seen over the last 2 years. China, emerging markets, India, Europe, as you know, Europe also at the moment is dealing with difficult issues, including the issue of Greece. Many of you will have been following this in the media. And in the next few years also, the growth rates in Europe are expected to be quite promising. So the economic environment for the next few years is that the trading partners, the countries with which Armenia that does its business, where you are likely to be going through a period of slow growth. That's one side. Then, I was going to say a little bit later about how it's improved. But you see, technology always has its own challenge. So that is the economic side. Now about investment and confidence. So this region, the South Caucasus region, is still a region of significant tensions. So there's the obvious issue of Nagorno-Karabakh. There's relations with Azerbaijan and Turkey. There's a tension in the side of Turkey. And there's a question of the relationship between the international community and Iran, which is a big and important area. So these tensions are important not just for the individual countries, but also for the region, because they affect confidence. Investors are not always as discerning as we would like. So you think here and say, yes, but this is happening there, not here. But if you're an investor making a decision, you just think very broadly. Well, there's this region, I'm not sure about this. Then you go somewhere else. Or you put a premium on how much you expect region. So tensions from the political side can spill over on the economic side. So what's the impact of all this on the region? If you look at all of the countries in the Caucasus and I think it was balanced right. If you look at all of the countries in the Caucasus and the Central, they all have a much lower economic growth rate. Would you want to change it? Soon they're going to find that the problem is not with the instruments, but with the speaker, no? So, when you look at the implications, say oil importing, energy importing countries in the Caucasus and Central Asia, Armenia, Georgia, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. What you find is the average rate of growth for all of them has dropped dramatically this year. Many of them not growing at all, some of them growing a little bit, on average about 1.5%. Population is growing faster than 1.5%. So when your economy is only growing at 1.5% and your population is growing faster, it means no improvement in living standards. And for Armenia this year, our best estimate is that the economy is not going to grow at all. And next year, maybe you see a little bit of a growth, 1.5. But more importantly to me, is that if you look out at the next 3-5 years, the projections that we have, and Mark Horton is not here. Mark Horton is the colleague who is head of our work on Armenia. He and his team and Teresa have made their own projections, and their projections are that the economy in Armenia is going to grow 3.5%. 3.5% for an economy like Armenia is just not going to generate enough jobs. I want to come back to this because I think it's the lack of how well prepared is Armenia to deal with this difficult context. And I use Armenia because you're in Armenia, you're interested in Armenia, but also because the issues that Armenia to the issues that many in the region are facing. So the good side is that if you look at the big macroeconomic picture, managing the budget, managing reserves, managing exchange rate, Armenia does pretty well. We have a tradition of prudent macroeconomic policy. And what this means is that when you have the last shock, 2009, you had 1 year when there was a big dip, but then you were able to come back and restore some degree of stability and growth. But in doing that, you used up a lot of the buffers that you had built up. What do I mean by that? It means that you ran some fiscal deficits, your budgets were spending more than your revenues, and that was good because it provided a stimulus to the economy, it was good because it provided jobs, but it ran up your debt as a country. Obviously, if you spend more than you earn, anybody amongst us, we end up having to finance it through debt. So the debt went up. So today, Armenia's debt is not alarmingly high. The countries are in much worse shape, but it's certainly high, and it's not at the level where you could say, it's okay, we can just keep running it. Similarly, when you were hit with the shock from the depreciation of the ruble, the impact on the currencies of all the countries in the region, all the countries in the region have had their own currencies depreciate as a result. Armenia also had to allow the crown to depreciate. But in the process, we lost some of the natural reserves. So you still have about 3 months of imports, which is a number many economists use to say they're about even. But again, you don't have a lot of extra to go in. So now you're facing the future on the macro side with a tradition of prudent management, but with less of a cushion to dip into than you did in the past. Is that you look at the structural reform. What do we mean by structural? Everybody talks about structural reform. So to me, the simple way to think about that is the framework within which the private sector does business. So you have the right supply of credit, and businesses go out and get credit at a good price. You have electricity supply that's regular and reasonably priced. You have roads and infrastructure that enable people to import or export or produce goods. And actually, if you have the soft skills are a very big part of the structural agenda. You have the human capital that you can use to try and make advantage of your physical attributes. And if you look at that, I think most of the countries in our region, this region, don't do so well. So on the structural side, there are different ways people measure them. Way to look at them. You look at something called the indices that people do to rank different countries in terms of their business environment. So the World Bank, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, have read about or read stuff by the World Bank. The World Bank produces an index called Doing Business. What it tries to do in that index is that it ranks every country in the world in terms of how easy it is to do business. And I have to say, Armenia doesn't do so badly. It's now 45, number 45, out of 180 countries. So it's better. But then there are other indices like the Global Competitiveness Index, which is produced by the World Economic Forum. You know, the people who get together every year in Davos. You've probably seen on the annual summit that they have in Davos, which brings together many people. But their index shows that Armenia is not doing so well. It's about 85 out of 150. Either way, there are bits where you can make it. So let me give you two examples. Today, information technology is at the center of so much that private sector activity is about. Many businesses rely on information technology to be able to fulfill orders, to be able to identify customers, market, do their business. We take it for granted. And Armenia has the opportunity also, given the skill set that you have of people, to be able to do businesses in sectors where information technology gives you a competitive advantage. But if you look at IT access in this country, it's quite low. Affordability of information technology and speed are well behind many of the countries with which you're trying to. So unless we improve that, it's going to be hard to set up businesses for you and for other people who want to take a role in those sectors. Another example, energy sector. So 20 years ago, you're all too young to remember this, but 20 years ago, in Armenia, we used to have blackouts, blockades, irregular supply of energy. And now, actually in some ways, the energy system works a lot better. You have more or less regular supply of energy. You have a better balance in the production of energy, gas, nuclear, hydro. And yet, energy sector keeps generating losses. Now, some of you are here, some of you were probably at the streets yesterday. Because the way to deal with balancing the needs of having a reliable, financially sound energy sector, on the one hand, and a pricing policy for energy that has enough popular acceptance is a challenge in any country. You're going through that now. See, that's a difficult issue to manage. Going forward, you know, your nuclear plant, Petsamor, has to be revamped, replaced. It's very old. It's taking as much as 50% of GDP to do that. That's a huge sum of money. Find a way of how you can finance that in a way that people see as being efficient and fair. So even in energy, there are issues going forward. Now, beyond energy, beyond information technology, I think more generally, when I step back and I look at the numbers that my colleagues put together on our meeting, what I see is that the level of investment is quite low. The government, public investment here, is about 2.5% of GDP. That's about $250 million. And really, to be able to grow more, you have to invest more. There is no magic formula. Where countries have been able to grow much faster in a sustained way without increasing what they invest. So investment is what generates growth. How can you increase investment? Well, one way would be to say, well, we can borrow money for it. But we already have very high debt. And this is a challenge facing many countries today. Everybody wants to increase investment to be able to generate faster growth. But so it's very hard to grow without investment. It's very hard. It's not easy to borrow more for it, although it's tempting because borrowing postpones difficult decisions. Some get to pay for it later. So the alternative to borrowing is that you have to raise revenues. Raise revenues is another way of saying you have to raise taxes. No one likes to pay more taxes. How do you build a consensus for raising taxes to finance more investment? And I think that brings me to this question of leadership. Because what is the nature of leadership going forward? Today, leadership is less about command and control systems, where you had a set of objectives, you got them done, you ordered people, say you do this, you do that, you do the other. Today you have to work, first of all, the people you have to work with don't work for you. You're working in a network. Secondly, nobody today, I'm sure none of you in this room, are reading instructions unless you understand why you're being given this instruction. What's the purpose? What's the trade-off? How is it going to achieve the objective? So you constantly, as leaders, have to persuade people about what you want them to achieve, which means you have to build a shared vision of what is the goal that you are collectively working towards. And that comes to, it's not just in business, it's in public service. So tomorrow, if you want to increase taxes and you go out and say we're going to increase taxes, you're not going to get much support. But if you go out with a vision, you can get people to buy into a vision where you have jobs and growth, and raising revenues is part of what is needed to finance the investment to get those jobs and growth, then you have a better support for it. Still not guaranteed you have a better chance. So I'll give you two examples, or three examples. If we had met 6 years ago, who would have said that the world's largest media company would produce no TV shows, no movies, and no music? That the world's largest lodging company, that lodging meaning hotel company, would own no hotels, no ski resorts, no beach resorts. The world's largest transportation company wouldn't own a single plane, train, taxi. And yet, today, you have Facebook, you have Airbnb,
You have Uber. They are the largest companies in their field in the world. And they're worth tens of billions of dollars. And they own nothing. But their leaders had a vision, and they saw the opportunities that were provided through a new way of working together, by networking, by bringing in people who were interested in providing services to those who wanted the services, and their role becomes visionaries and coordinators rather than managers in the traditional sense, where they have a plant and they have a set of employees, and the employees produce a product, and the product that's sold to a customer. Even the plant, the manufacturing today, is no longer done in a single place. There are many people who give you examples. The shoe that you buy that probably has had parts produced in 10 different locations. Marketing is done by somebody else. Transport is organized by somebody else. And the nature of leadership, this new world, is a very different kind of leadership, where you have to be open to innovation, to persuasion, to influencing, and to working with people who need to buy into your vision for you to be able to achieve your objectives. I think that's a challenge for young people everywhere. So, I don't want to spend too much time, and I want really to use this opportunity to talk with you and get your own thoughts on this. But if I want to leave you with one thought, I think it is that when you look at a country, look at Armenia, look at the next 5 years, you can take a view that says context is very difficult. The economic partners are not growing very fast. Political and regional context, there's a lot of tensions. And you could say, in this context, there's not a lot of one thing. You settle for the mediocre. Or you could say, actually, even in this context, Armenia is a small country, talented population, language skills, where you can say, we can find a niche that will exploit those opportunities. For example, you could say, the relationship between Iran and the rest of the world might change dramatically in the next few weeks. And if it does, you're well placed here to take advantage of that, to assist in the opening up of a large market. But it's a question of mindset and leadership. And the same thing applies to business and the way you go about in the private sector, which is if you think of the opportunities not in the traditional sense of a production machinery sitting in a single space, but through a network of opportunities among people who all have great ideas, and then you can come up with ways in which you can opportunities that haven't even been identified yet, just as Uber, Facebook, and Airbnb were not really at all identified and well known only a few years ago. So let me end with that, but I'm happy to discuss with you your thoughts on it, and also happy to respond to any questions you might have about what's the role of the IMF in all of this. What can the IMF do with this, and how can we support countries during this period? Thank you very much.
Շարժնակալենք, պարոն Ահմեդ, այս հրաշալի հնարավորության համար, ձեր մտքերի եւ ելույթի համար։ Այժմ ինչպես պայմանավորվել էինք, կցանկանանք հասնել հարց ու պատասխանների։ Խնդրեմ, համեցեք, ներկայացեք եւ ձեր հարցը։ Դուք կարող եք հարցը անգամ հայերեն տալ,
Mr. Ahmed, it's very nice to see you here. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Agassi Kavajan from Armenian State University of Economics, Research Center. And I have a couple of remarks and a question. First of all, a couple of 2 months ago, Bloomberg, there was an article in Bloomberg which told that Russia is emerging on this found market and the investors are coming back. Secondly, about foreign investors investment in Armenia. We know direct investment in Armenia. That's my remark, and the question is that in the region, not only Armenian dram, but all of the currencies, even Australian dollar, lost their value, and Armenian dram less in value, 17 or 18% of the currencies in the region. But Armenia lost global funds, then Russia. I think maybe 33% of global funds in Armenia were lost in this year. So my question is, why so, and how we can stop it? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments also. I think let me say a word about the comment, if I can, which is that we are all expecting Russia to contract still by over 3% this year, not to grow next year. But it's a better projection than we had a few months ago. And the Russian authorities actually that there is a recovery that is already, a stabilization that is already happening. And maybe it will do better than that. And if it does, that's good news for Armenia, because as you said, it's a big market for you. It's also FDI. So I think if that happens, it's a good thing. Now, then there's this other question you raised about currencies. All the current countries in the region had their currencies depreciate. And there were really two reasons behind it. One was that because of the depreciation of the ruble, many of them that depend on Russia for remittances, Armenia is a country where remittances are quite important, saw a big drop in their earnings, export earnings. So the remittances went down by nearly over 40% in the case of Armenia. And in other countries also, they went down by a third. So exports dropped 20% or so, remittances dropped. And so that the new equilibrium, in a way, for the exchange rate market was to let your exchange rate depreciate. For the oil exporting countries in the region, there was which is the price of oil dropped. And of course, if you look at Australia, Australia is a commodity exporter, so commodity exporters around the world felt a bit that same pressure because the price of commodities also dropped. But in your currencies dropped, every country has to make a judgment, which is how fast do you let it drop, how far do you let it drop, how much do you use the reserves you have built to cushion that change. And it's particularly a concern in countries where there is a lot of dollarization. What do I mean by that? When many loans are made in dollars and many deposits are held in dollars, then if you change the price of your currency, the dollar,
Obviously, everybody who has a loan in a dollar suddenly finds that they have to earn more domestic currency to be able to pay it back. And that has an impact on the balance sheet of companies, on the balance sheet of banks. So many countries were trying to find an equilibrium in their own way. And that's the reason why, in the case of Armenia, you found a particular equilibrium. Some other countries took a path where they let it drop faster. And it's a judgment call that every country has to make.
Շարժարություն, հաջորդ հարցի համար, ավեցիք։
Hi, my name is Satanik Tushbashan. I'm a risk manager at the Central Bank of Armenia. Well, first of all, thanks for your speech. And two questions. Currently, we know that debt to GDP is trending international research. And depending on countries, debt to GDP ratio differs drastically, depending whether the country is developing or developed, or depending on the country's capacity. So I'm interested, how can we research the optimal level of debt to GDP for Armenia, or what do you think, what it should be? And my second question is, are there any agencies or companies which do consulting or legal advisory for countries to increase their doing business rating? And if there are, would Armenia benefit from them? Thank you.
I thought you were going to answer the question that was posed before, since you're from the risk management. But so the two questions you raised, I think that the first one, there's no obvious answer. It's not like there is a magic number that you would say, this is the number above which you can't go and below which everything is fine. Because it's really a function for each country of the amount of debt that they can carry in a way that makes them able to deal with external shocks and to give them the margin to be able to borrow more if they need to, if they're hit by a shock. And there's a lot of research that has been done on what is the optimal amount of debt that you can carry. And generally speaking, the more country has a very high in capital markets, the more debt it is able to carry, because people are willing to hold it, that debt. So if you look at Japan, for example, it has a debt level that is well over the size of its economy. But people are willing to hold it, and Japan pays very little for its debt. But if you look at other emerging markets particularly, when their debt levels start to get around 40, 50, I'm talking about particularly external debt, 40, 50%, 60%, then you see that the markets begin to react by charging more for it. So it shows that markets are saying there's more of a risk associated with it. It also depends on who holds your debt. If your debt is held mainly by official creditors, by international financial institutions like the World Bank or by regional banks, that's a different kind of debt than debt that is held by short-term investors who are in the market. So I think it depends a little bit on that. Your second question, which is on consultants who can help to improve your doing ratings index, there are many consultants who will help you with anything. You just have to pay them the right amount. But the point is that I think it's important not to think of it as a way of improving your index. It's a way of improving the conditions which will make people do business better. If you do that, the index will improve automatically. What I see in the index is really an identification of the areas in every country where investors find it particularly hard to do business. So in some countries, for example, investors say the main problem is that infrastructure is very poor. Now you can't improve that index without improving infrastructure. In other countries, investors might say, our big problem is that the court system is very arbitrary. It takes a very long time to get resolution of commercial disputes, and we don't trust what comes out of the court system. So to address that issue, you really have to look at the court system and its functioning rather than find some shortcut way of improving the index.
Oh my God. Hi, thank you for your speech. Sorry about the mic. I'm Guadalupe. I'm a freshman from University of Miami. And I thought it was very interesting how you brought up the concept of making business here in Armenia. As we all know, most of the business here, like the really big ones, are controlled by monopolies. So that's one of the biggest reasons lots of investors coming in. How can we change as the youth? How can we change the way that we do business so that it's not a monopoly and so we also have like a perfect competition type of business, you know? Because it's very difficult to start a business now with all the other monopolies around. Thank you.
Thank you. I really good question, because if you look at the structure of how business is done in any country, in almost every country, not just in Armenia, but in almost every country, you find that there are some people whose business works fine. So they don't have problems getting a license in time, they don't have problems getting a building permit in time. And there's actually another index I'll tell you about, which I find quite interesting. It's also produced by the World Bank, doing business index. What it shows is for each indicator, like how long does it take to get a building permit, what is the firms that get it fastest and the firms that get it slowest. So for example, you might find that in a country, the 10% of the firms are able to get their building permit within a week. And then there is a range of how long it takes. And there's 20% of the firms for whom it takes over a year to get a business permit. Now, why is it that some firms take so much longer and the range is very wide in some countries, quite narrow in other countries? By and large, where the rules are clear and where they're applied evenly, without discrimination, the range is quite narrow. It may take you 4 weeks to get a building permit, maybe you get 3, maybe it'll take you 5, but it's not going to be a year. It's not going to be a day. But it's where the rules are applied with a bit of discretion, and often it's who is applying for the building permit. So maybe when you apply, you get it in 1 day, and I apply, I might take a year. And it might only be partly be due to my incompetence. It may also be because I know all the right people. Then it changes the thing. So I think what you're saying is very important, because to really get the kind of vibrant economy that we're talking about as the economy of the future, where people are coming up with ideas and setting up businesses, and 70% of these businesses fail within a year. And they should, because many new businesses actually fail. But then they go home and set up a new business again. They learn from that experience.
that requires structure where everybody feels that they can work under the same set of rules. And it also means that you have to make the system contestable. What does it mean, contestable? Contestable means that if I produce glasses, then I don't have any special barriers that have been put in to stop you coming in and producing glasses if you want to, or it just becomes harder for you. So every day you should be able to say, actually I can produce a better glass than this for 20% less and put it on the market, and that keeps me on my toes. Because if you're not out there as a constant competitor, the incentive for me to do a better job all the time becomes weaker and weaker. And I think part of the issue in the vision of the economy going forward is one where the playing field would be much more level, and where everybody would feel that they're able to do business in the same way.
Hello. Thank you very much for your speech again and for a chance to listen to you, Mr. Ahmed. I'm Alpina Hakan, and I'm a graduate student from leadership. I have one question and two small questions. First of all, I want to go to the question that you said about the geopolitical situation, about Armenia. Of course, we have now in 2013 we went to this union, Eurasian Union. And after that, in May in Riga, they started to change some rules for partnership countries, and it's good. So it means that Europe don't want to lose the contact with Armenia. So it can be also very good bridge between Russia and Europe. So in this situation, how can we use in the good way for us and for all the world to use our resources and to do some to develop our country, to make partnership between these big territorial parts. And then my two small questions about which countries you see that we can cooperate, Armenia, for which countries are good for cooperation with Armenia, also which countries we can learn and what can be good examples to learn and develop our country for future. Thank you very much for answers.
On the geopolitics, I think the Eurasian Economic Union opens up many opportunities. You see some benefits already. Armenians were able to work there, easier way. But Armenia sits in a very interesting and strategic position. So you can also at the same time develop and exploit opportunities and partnerships with other countries in Europe. So you can look both directions and benefit from it. And I think it's actually a good thing for a small country to diversify the partnerships and the economic relations that it has. And in that, it can also help as a bridge, as you say. So personally, where I sit, I think it's the more opportunities Armenia has, the better it is for the country going. Now, on the question you raised about, what would be a role model or a country to look at, I'm not sure that there's any single country that you would say has done well in every front. And I also always worry about looking at a single country and trying to replicate it, because every country has its own history, its own culture, its own institutions, its dynamics, and any attempt to sort of
apply the lessons from one country into another, you have to be very careful. But having said that, maybe there are examples of things that fully small countries have done in different ways. One is that people have looked to, for example, in the area of simplifying rules, regulations, and the business environment in the region is one that you all know, versus is Georgia. And when I went to Georgia last, they took me to see this place where now you can get all your licensing. For example, if you bring a car in, get everything done. You can get everything sorted out. Similarly, if you want to set up a business, you get done very quickly. So, in that area, you can learn from Georgia. But in other areas, there are other countries. Singapore has been a very good example of a very small location which has really exploited its capacity to become a center, a hub in the region. So I think different examples from different places, and I would try to rather pull examples in specific areas than to look for a single role model.
Thank you very much. My name is Sebak Maunkan. I work with Commerce Bank, Investment Department, Portfolio Manager. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Going to the term challenges and opportunities for Armenia during economic shocks, I have a question which in regard with financial markets. I want to understand whether the absence of capital markets in Armenian financial market is an opportunity or weakness during regional and global economic shocks. During your speech, you said that we have problems in government debt, but I want to mention that we have also problems in corporate sector, because according to all bank surveys, the debt to equity ratio of Armenian big companies is more than 15, and they deserve to spend during debt financing, during the banking sector, and they need equity funding to raise, to finance their further expansion. What opportunities do you see for Armenian companies to issue equities and to raise equity funds? And my second question refers you mentioned Facebook, Google, other companies. In United States, we have Silicon Valley, but in Armenia it's a big problem because our financial sector is based on banking sector, and banks won't finance such risky companies. We need venture capital. What opportunities do you see in these sectors? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I think that your questions really all revolve around the nature of capital markets in Armenia and how they can develop to support different kinds of enterprises, innovation. And I think Mark is a much greater expert on Armenian capital markets, so I'm going to turn to him. I want to perhaps say one thing, which is, when you say the corporate sector also has a rising debt problem, in a way it's not surprising, because when you get hit by an external shock, and there's a big slowdown in your economy, invariably that's going to show up in the balance sheets of the corporate sector. In addition, to the extent the corporate sector has debt which is denominated in dollars, then clearly the value of that debt goes up, the depreciation of to make this one Perhaps it's a question of how quickly can companies move to address the issue or countries move to address the issue. I think one lesson we have learned, take away as a life lesson as much as an economic management, is take your losses early. Whether it's in your business, whether it's in running an economy, whether it's in your personal life, if you have a loss, take it, move past it. Because if you don't take your loss, if you postpone the problem, if you let it fester, 90% of the time it'll be harder to deal with rather than easier. We all live in hope that with the passage of time, the problem we face today will disappear and we won't have to deal with it. But the older you get, I'm in a much better place than any of you. The older you get, the more you that 90% of the time, the problem doesn't go away, it just gets bigger. So take your losses. That applies to countries, to governments. Much easier for government to make difficult decisions in the first year when they're elected than in the second, third, or fourth year of their term. It applies to companies and it applies to the capital market structure. Let me ask Mark.
Thank you. I'm Mark Horton. I'm the IMF's mission chief for Armenia and lead our work here. I think the absence of the capital market is certainly problematic, and it's not necessarily related to the lack of an institutional setup, because a lot of the legislation and institutions are in place and hasn't been used as much as it could be. And I think that again reflects the business environment more generally. Lack of trust, lack of transparency, concern about perhaps over-regulation. I think we hope to see that the pension reform that was passed would have changed this dynamic. It's still in place. It's still accumulating funds at much less rate than was expected. There's funding available. I think it's where we just need to see some successful examples of companies pursuing this approach. And we start to see some. One of the commercial banks made a bond offering internationally last year. That was the first one for Armenia, $75 million. So that was a positive development. Some of the big companies need to follow that and look that way as well. Most of them rely on parent company financing up until now because it allows them to raise funding with less scrutiny, less review, less due diligence of their operations. So it will take some time, but the institutions are broadly in place. And a very last night with one of our colleagues from one of the development banks, and he said out of 100 projects they look at in Armenia, the first 50 are related to politically connected individuals, and they can't finance those projects. Then the next 25 are simply not sufficiently transparent to be able to give confidence to their board to approve those projects. And the last 25 are over leveraged. They have too much debt. So it means that there certainly is an opportunity to move in this direction, but there are some obstacles, both in terms of transparency and trust, and really strengthening financing. I think your point about private equity or venture capital, that's going to take some time, and the same issues are going to be there. I think probably the initial phase will be either to do so with family money. There's certainly scope to do that with some wealthy investors in Armenia, and also I think with funding from sort of official sources. So the EBRD, for example, is raising a $15 million venture capital fund now. So it will happen, but it's too slow. But the framework is in place, and I think we just need to see some good and others to take the opportunity to go that direction.
Շնորհակալություն։ Ես շատ բարձր եմ։
Շարքից։ Այս առաջին երկու շարքերը ակտիվ են, խնդրեմ, ներկայացեք։
Shanazar Natham, my question is in Armenian about dollar. In this century, այս տարում ինչ եղավ, դոլարը դարձավ կես գինգրա, այսինքն կորցրեց իր արժեքը վալուտան, բայց մնաց էլի բան ամենավստահելի վալուտան ամբողջ աշխարհում։ Ինչի չփոխվեց կամ ինչու էլի մարդիկ մնացին հավատարիմ հենց այդ
I'm not sure that how much value the dollar lost, but I think the core point you raise is a very important one. Why is it that people are willing to hold dollars? Let me actually ask you another question, which is linked to that. You know, in Switzerland today, if you want to deposit money in your deposit account, what is the interest rate that you get for your deposit? So you get less back after a year than you put in. Why is it that people want to go and put their money in dollars, in Swiss francs, in Deutschmarks? And basically it's because for them it's safety which is the first driver of their motivation. It's not the return on their money, it's parking their assets in a safe place. And they're willing to pay a price for that safety. And that's why today, for example, with what was happening in Greece, this morning, the yields of Deutsche Bunds went down. People wanted to buy Deutsche Bunds. Why did they want Deutsche Bunds? Because there was uncertainty in Europe. So, because there is uncertainty, you fly to. And when things begin to calm down, when the uncertainty is lower, when the volatility is lower, then everybody suddenly says, I need yield. So all the asset managers, instead of going to safety, start searching for where they can get a higher yield. And that's why sometimes during periods when the markets feel that things are going well, they actually chase yields by buying emerging market paper, by buying corporate paper, and by pushing the price up of this paper, so bringing the rates down. So last year, for example, a year and a half ago, people had put a lot of money into emerging markets, trying to get better yields than the 0% or 0.25% they could get. Said that they were thinking about, at some point in the future, of phasing out the policy they had of increasing the money supply through using unconventional means. They were just said, we are thinking about it. And that caused many investors to suddenly overreact and pull their money back out of the emerging markets and go running for dollars. And as a result, some emerging markets, Korea, South Africa, Turkey, India, Brazil, lost a lot of capital in a week. And people were not willing to buy their bonds except at a much lower price, much higher interest rate. So I think part of the reason why you see capital movements and what explains differences in interest rates is expectation of the future, but it's also how much of a risk appetite they have at any given time.
Hi, my name is Hai. And I want to ask you less of a technical question, more of a conceptual question. So one of the ways of improving investment is actually printing money for a country. So if you have problems bringing investment from abroad, you can actually print the money, especially if your economy is that much foreign oriented. So I was wondering if there is such a rule or some way of understanding money actually can be printed according to GDP before you run a risk of uncontrolled inflation. That's my first question. If you don't mind, I have two more. Second question, if, when we have a small country like ours, we are small, GDP is small, population is small. Do you think that it's probably a better way for a country like ours to look inward for development rather than outward? So rather than focusing on export and import, try to develop our internally through some ways. And the last one, do you think that the program that IMF and World Bank have actually feed the needs that Armenia has right now, or maybe there is some disconnect? Thank you.
So, I think the first question is, it's good thing you raised it. People in governments think sometimes, we're not getting enough growth, we're not getting enough investment, or maybe not just investment, you want to finance more consumption. Why not print money? After all, you've got central bank can print money. And I think that you can, within limits. In fact, one of the responses of the global crisis in the US and in Europe has precisely been that the central banks have printed a lot of money. The balance sheets of the central bank, the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank, are bigger today than was the case 7 years ago. How much can you do that? Well, it depends on two things. One is, how quickly do you see the impact on inflation? Depends on what the money is going to be used for. So in some markets, if demand is very depressed, there is a lot of resources available, it takes a while for the inflationary impact to come through. In other cases, you see the inflationary impact quickly, but inflation hurts mainly poor people. Because the rich always find ways to protect themselves from inflation. But ordinary people who get paid month to month, week to week, have the toughest time dealing with inflation. And the second risk with that is that when you print money, say you're the central bank, you decide to print, $1 million, you hand it to me and say, you're a nice guy, go invest. Right? Happens. So I decide to invest, but I need equipment, I need machinery. So I import the machinery. So I go back and say, I need dollars for this. So I give you the drum back, and I buy dollars for it. So I use part of the money you gave me to import using dollars. So some countries find that if they print money, then over time, the impact is also curves start to go down, and that means that people start thinking, I better take my money out of here, or the exchange rate has to adjust. So there is a cost that you have to think. So the bottom line is, it's one of the instruments of economic policy. This monetary policy is what you're using. But how much you can use is really a function of managing the constraints in terms of inflation, in terms of the reserve side. Now, the second question you raised, with a small country like Armenia, should you be looking inward or outward? I would argue that countries the size of Armenia really have no alternative but to look out. Because the economy is too small to be competitive by itself with closed borders. So I think that most of the examples we have of small countries which have done well tend to be countries that have found a niche internationally or regionally, try to close off and try to grow inside, because then you end up not being able to exploit the economies of scale that come from being small. So small to me is a reason, more of a reason to look out. I thought you were actually, if you had said let's take a big country like Brazil or India, where trade is very small. How much can they grow without, by looking inward? You could make an argument, but even there I would argue that the price of that is that your industry, your services tend to fall behind in terms of global standards. You become more and more uncompetitive over time. And the final question you have is, are the programs of the government by the IMF and by the World Bank appropriate? Do they address the issues that Armenia faces now? I can only speak for the IMF, and I think for the IMF there are a couple of things that are important. One is that the program is not a program of the IMF. The program has to be a program that is designed by the country itself, because the country knows its own situation better. Mark and his team are very talented, but if they sit in Washington and even with Teresa here and say, this is what we think we should do in Armenia, like, it's interesting, but it's literature, no? I mean, to be relevant, it has to reflect the priorities of the government and has to draw upon the perspective of different stakeholders. The second thing I would say is that the program cannot be fixed in stone. So the government had a program last year, which we were starting to support. But this year it was hit by many shocks. Growth is going to be lower, exports are going to be lower, the budget deficit will be bigger. What should you do? So you have to adapt the program as you go along. I think the IMF can't say we had a program, therefore you must fail it, because the world changed, the program hasn't. And the final thing I want to the roles of the IMF, and it's important that it plays this role, is that it is the objective external agency that has the responsibility to say the objectives that you, the country, have set yourself and the policies that you are following to achieve it, in our judgment, will or will not in likelihood achieve those policies. That's my objective. But I'm going to make it very hard for private sector to invest, and I'm going to spend all my money on wages and salaries and not on public investment in the public sector. Then the IMF has to say, I'm sorry, but I don't think that we don't think that this adds up. And I think as an agency, we have a responsibility to say the program that a country is pursuing will or will not achieve the objective. And when the implementation of the program slows down, it's our responsibility to say, we don't think you are proceeding as you had planned. Now, maybe you need a different structure, maybe you need a different program, but we can't pretend that the objective will be achieved if the actions are not taken. And that sometimes makes our role a little bit difficult, a little bit of an irritant, because nobody likes to be reminded by someone who comes in every few months and tells you, you promised you were going to do A, B, C. You've only done A, but not B and C. And sometimes there's a good explanation, and sometimes it's that, it's hard to do B and C. But if you don't do B and C, then you need to change what you're going to achieve at the end of the year or at the end of 3 years. So one of Mark and Teresa's jobs in many other countries is to be the objective friend who shows up asking difficult questions. And I think that's a role that international agencies can use to do.
Good evening. My name is Arusnyan Liximan from Russian Armenian University. Thank you for your speech. And I have a question related to my dissertation thesis. It was about how offshore jurisdictions impact on economies. So, as you mentioned about investments in Armenia, I want to say that more than half of investments, as like foreign direct investments, as portfolio investments in Armenia are from offshores. So I was trying to understand offshores, it is good or bad. I came to conclusion that it is not very bad. I want to see that because if you see how many countries got prosperity from implementing some offshore techniques like tools, zero tax for foreign business or other things. My question is, what is it possible to implement in Armenia? Sure, because in Armenia we don't have developed financial market, we don't have stability, and people will not trust our economy. But what about if there is a zero tax? More companies can come and open their business, so it will raise our employment. It will bring technologies with them. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that probably has to be the last question because we are running out of time. But I think that the question is about whether it's a good idea to have a zero tax for foreign companies investing in Armenia. I don't know enough about the facts of Armenia to give you an answer on Armenia. Maybe Mark has a view on Armenia or Teresa. But I think in general, the experience of most countries is that when you put in a tax regime or an incentive regime that privileges foreign investors, domestic investors, you actually make it harder. Problem in some, I don't know whether it's the case here or not, that a lot of going to be domestic investment goes outside the country and comes back like foreign investment. So you may think you're getting foreign investment, but really what you're getting is domestic investors. It's cheaper and more profitable to take their money out and bring it back as foreign investors. I am personally a little bit cautious about all schemes to a privileged preferential investment code or regime for foreign investors, because over time you find that these investors really don't bring the benefits that you had expected. I'd much rather focus on making the business climate and the tax regime friendly for all investors, and that would include domestic as well as foreign investors. Mark, anything you want to add to that? No? Good. Well, just last question. Last question, please.
Good evening, my name is Rusma Hakokan. I'm also from Central Bank of Armenia. And I have a question about new cryptocurrencies as Bitcoin. So, as you mentioned, the IT technologies have an impact to GDP, or they can have good influence on economy. But how about cryptocurrencies which are not have obligations for any country, for any organization? And there, in my opinion, there are some sort of financial bubbles which can blow up and have influence in all countries which are involved in cryptocurrency transactions and sort of their activities. So I influence in it's a new sort of crisis which can arise from cryptocurrencies. Thank you.
Just getting the question clear from Teresa. I think that, all new systems of this, initiatives of this kind bring opportunities, but they also bring new kinds of risks. And one of the lessons that I think it's important for us to take away is that
when the initiative is being developed, there are many who are taking out the benefits, and there are fewer people who are identifying the risks, especially if people make money from the initiative. I remember going back to a few years ago, before the financial crisis, when all of the securitization of mortgages, whereby banks were taking the mortgages that all of the people in this room had, collecting them, bundling them together, dividing them up into pieces, and selling those pieces as bonds, was seen as a fantastic way of spreading risk, improving financial market functioning, improving intermediation, and something that had limited risks. And yet we know that securitized lending of mortgages, when the markets began to unwind, was one of the biggest problems that made the cost of the financial crisis so high. And today, we know that the financial crisis of 2008-2009 had the third largest impact on global economic activity in the last century. The First World War, the Second World War, and the financial crisis of 2008-2009, people measure as the three biggest factors that have had an impact on economic activity. And yet, before that happened, it was hard to find people who would talk about the risks of securitization in a way. So I think one of the roles of the IMF is, as somebody said, we have to be there to take the punch bowl away while it's still going on. When the party is going on, everybody is reaching for the punch bowl and drinking more. I think that's for the IMF's role to say, hold on, maybe there are more risks here than there are. And I think that applies to this area.
Շարժալի, շատ շնորհակալ ենք պարոն Մասուդ Ահմեդ այս հրաշալի հնարավորության համար, շատ շնորհակալ ենք IMF-ի ներին, որ այս հնարավորությունը այս խիստ գրաֆիկի շրջանակներում կարողացան կարգացնել մեր հայ երիտասարդների համար։ Մենք հավատում ենք, որ նմանատիպ հանդիպումները շարունակական կլինեն, հնարավորաբար ավելի խորը եւ այլ թեմաների մասով նույնպես քննարկումներ կազմակերպել։ Շատ շնորհակալ ենք մասնակիցներին ձեր ժամանակի հետաքրքրության համար։ Խնդրում ենք ձեզ այդ վերջին 15-ից 8:30 նախատեսնենք փոքրիկ հյուրասիրություն եւ մասնավորապես այն է կարեւոր, որ միմյանց կոնտակտներով եւ ծանոթանալ հետեւի ասում, ինչպես նաեւ կարող եք ստեղծել արդեն մեր սպիկերների եւ ներկայացուցիչների հետ։ Շնորհակալություն։ All right.